Ralph Rasm got kicked out of his house by his wife. Just a minor indiscretion, really. A slight mark on the good record of character was all he said about it. He moved into the boathouse at North Shore Docks. That wasn't strictly allowed, but though all the fishermen and even the dockmaster knew he was there, they all turned a blind eye and would not say a thing about it, even to each other. They all knew Ralph was a proud man, though maybe a bit too proud. He was always a good neighbor, always ready to lend a hand if he was able, and he could make them chortle with a good joke. So they thought, what the hell? It wasn't like they needed the boathouse anyway, once the sun went down. So Ralph made a small nest for himself out of old sail and torn nets, with a life jacket as a pillow, and with such a bed he passed every one of his nights of exile in relative comfort. Every night, that is, save one. It happened one Saturday night. After all the fishermen got back in port early to have a few hours of leisure with wives or girlfriends or, well, whatever really, before they got up for church the next day, Ralph found himself utterly alone on the dock and unable to sleep. You see, there was no door on the boathouse, though there should have been, but it got chewed up and blown away by a storm a few years back. That night, the wind blew straight off the water into Ralph's nest. He tossed and turned and eventually swore and got up. He knew he'd get no peace until the wind quit, so he threw on his jacket and marched outside. The dock was slick with ocean spray, and it glittered like pearls in the light from the city on the peninsula, a mile distant. He found a pocket out of the wind behind a massive old buoy sealed to the concrete dock with rust. He warmed himself with cheap cigarettes and an occasional draught of rum and stared idly out to sea. There were scarcely any clouds in the sky, and the moon was near full, shining brightly upon the chalk. The wind moaned as it whipped by the buoy, rustled as it moved into the great bay trees on the shore. The fishermen and their women were all, Ralph thought, warm and snug in their dens of pleasure, wherever those were, maybe in the band of electric light on the peninsula. And suddenly, he realized he was more truly isolated this night than even what he was used to. He rolled the idea around in his head, found the bitter taste of it not so displeasing, and lay it aside to deal with another time. A violent splashing startled him from his reverie. Sharks, he wondered, narrowing his eyes. One of the big cuttlefish stranded on the rocks. It somehow didn't sound like either of those, for there was a hint of rhythm to it, which Ralph couldn't account for. Splash it went, splash, splash. Like somebody, Ralph mused, knocking on the door. He grinned at the image, then shivered as a gust of wind blew harsh around the buoy. The splashing grew in strength. Why? It was coming from the water, just under the docks. Ralph, curious, stuck his head out from round the buoy and peered down into the waves. "Throw a rope," said one of the heads, bobbing up and down in the surf. Ralph screamed and jumped back. He felt sweat break out on his neck and saw his hand shake. No, he told himself, no. The voice came again. "Throw a rope." It was hoarse, wet, sounds forced through a rotten instrument. Other ruined voices joined the chorus. "Throw a rope! Throw a rope!" Ralph was near shocked out of his mind. But even so, he remained at heart a sensible man. There was no way he was going to do something so stupid as to actually get a rope and throw it over, was what he thought. Right until one particular voice broke from the chant and called out, "Come on, Ralph, throw a rope. Don't leave a brother down here." Ralph recognized the voice right away. "Okay, man," he said, numbed into obedience. He grabbed a rope from the boathouse, tied one end to the buoy, and tossed the rest into the water. The dead men, for that's what they so clearly were, took a few minutes to all clamber up onto the dock. They were all frightful to look at, all in various stages of decay. Flesh turned pale, burst out of soul-dried skin. Barnacles clung in clumps to nipples and ears. Bone gleamed white under the moon. The corpses began to march stiffly past Ralph, heading to the boathouse. All save one, which approached the old homeless man and shook him by the hand. "Hey, Ralph," it said, muscle slipping out of skin as brittle as parchment, slipping over Ralph's fingers. "How you doing, man?" "I be fine, come." "I be fine," whimpered the living man, who couldn't tear his gaze away. We looked for you, man, when you didn't come back. I guess the storm got you after all, right?" "Yeah, it got me." Ralph couldn't figure out how the dead man could speak. For where there once was a jaw, there was only a cavern, a hole in the skull, in which small crabs danced and glared out, snapping their claws. The rest of the dead men returned from the boathouse, each carrying a bucket. As Ralph watched, the dead men filled the bucket with seawater and left them standing on the docks. "As long as our graves are underwater, we gotta keep walking," Cum explained. Something with soft, boneless arms pushed out from behind one of his raisin-dried eyes. "If we get rid of all the water in the ocean like this, we can rest. We can come home." "Sure, man. Sure," Ralph nodded. His tongue felt thick, like a dead animal. "We just need more buckets," sighed Crumb, as he followed the other dead man back into the waves. "You say hi to my ma for me," he called out, before sinking into the heaving black. When the fishermen got back from church the next day, they found Ralph sitting on the docks, surrounded by those buckets filled with seawater. He was dipping his finger in each one in slow, methodical movements. "Gotta talk to my wife," the fisherman heard him mutter. "I ain't that proud, damn it." The end.
From Somerset Village, one of Bermuda's loveliest roads winds around Mangrove Bay, heading south past Long Bay to an old house called Belfield. Today, Belfield looks much as it did more than a century and a half ago, small but elegant. A perfect late Georgian home built in the 1830s by a sea captain named John William Gilbert for his young bride, Elizabeth Hunt. When Elizabeth first crossed that threshold, she must have paused to admire the curious fanlight over the front door, a delicate neo-Gothic sunburst of glass. a symbol of love, perhaps, of welcome. Captain Gilbert was often away at sea, 9 months out of every year. He sailed north to Halifax, south to Demerara, carrying the family business and the hopes of home in his wake. Elizabeth remained at Belfield with their 2 small children and a handful of servants. She kept the lamps burning, and every Christmas she waited for his return, his laughter, for the gifts he brought from distant ports. And one winter's night, just before Christmas, she awoke to find the bed curtains drawn back. There, in the dim light, stood her husband. His hair was wet. Seawater dripped from his coat onto the floor. His face was pale, as if carved from the moonlight itself. "You must take the children with you to East Side House." And before she could speak, he was gone. Elizabeth lay frozen, heart pounding. Then, trusting her senses, or perhaps her fear, she rose, gathered her children, and went at once to her family home overlooking Cavello Bay. Days passed. Christmas came, but Captain Gilbert did not. His ship never reached Bermuda. No wreck was ever found. No word ever came. And so, Belfield stands, still gazing out to sea, its windows watching the horizon for a man who never came home. Some say, on winter nights, when the wind blows from the south, you can hear dripping footsteps crossing the old bedroom floor, and a voice whispering from the shadows, "Take the children and go." Perhaps love never truly leaves these island shores. It just finds new ways to return.
Salutations, snacks. You all look delicious tonight. And I'm so hungry. Let me entertain you if I can, with a little story like a little worm to your brain. Hopefully it won't haunt you. There was once a Somerset man. We'll call him Joe. He was a good man at heart, but he had one terrible habit. He loved to drink. This was his crutch. Every night, Joe would go out with his friends. He'd laugh, he'd sing, he'd dance into the very small hours of the morning. And that's fine for Joe, but he had a very poor wife, all stuck at home. Every night he'd come home worse for wear, and every night she'd pray that he would come back safe and sound. But no matter how much she prayed, he would not stop. When he stumbled through the door each morn, he would sing and slam doors and shut windows. The neighbors, appalled, would get up and bang on the wall, and as loud as they banged, he sang louder still. And his wife prayed and prayed. Fortunately for her, I answered. The one night, Joe decided to head into Hamilton to his very favorite bar, Harry's. Thinking to be a little more sensible, he hitched a ride with a friend, and he told him, "Come midnight, cut me off. Come midnight, get me in that car." Well, you know how that went. Midnight came and went, and by the time Joe looked up from his glass, it was already the quiet hours of the morning. And his friend and no taxis were anywhere to be seen. So Joe, with a little bit of pride and fully drunk, decided to walk home, all alone. Heading down South Shore, he was doing just fine until he came across Church Bay, and that is when he heard it. A whisper on the wind, a cry on the breeze, just a little sound coming from the rocks. Joe stumbled on over, a curious soul he always was, and what he saw sobered him up in an instant. Right there, in the rocks, was a tiny babe wrapped in rough, close cloth. Joe just stared. Now, he wasn't a man very fond of children. He didn't want any of his own, but his wife was desperate to start a family. And so, what providence is this? Joe leaned down to pick up the child, and as he did, little hands stretched up to greet him. He pulled the baby close, so light in its little rough clothes, oddly calm. So Joe started to walk. What providence is this? He'll make it home safe and with a nice surprise for his poor wife. He even started humming a tune, something gentle and low for once. When he reached the main road is when he heard at first just this little voice just outside his ear. Take me back where you found me from. Joe stopped in the night. He turned, and there was no one under the street light. No one but him and this baby. He looked around. Nothing. He looked down, and the baby looked back with eyes that, if Joe was being honest, were a little too old for someone so young. Joe nearly dropped him right there, but he decided to keep on walking. Surely it was just the alcohol. As he walked, the babe grew heavier. Nothing unnormal. Things happen when you get tired. He shifted it to the other shoulder to find it was no longer a baby. He had a toddler in his arms, fully grown, a small child. It's very odd, but you know what? It was probably a trick of the light. I'll keep walking. He makes it down to White Hill. The voice sounds again, just outside his ear, slightly louder now. Put me back where you found me from. Joe assumed it was just the wind. He cuddled the child. We're almost home, lad, don't you worry. But the boy yanked that hand free, and now he was no boy at all. He was nearly full grown, a teenager, looking Joe in the eye. His eyes blazed with light. And now, directly from his lips came that voice again, strong and assertive. Put me back where you found me from. Joe stumbled back and fell, terrified, his voice shrieking like a child, a reversal. The eyes of this teen, ancient and powerful. He cried out, I'll take you back, I'll take you back. Do not hurt me. The boy stepped forward, now a man. Take me back. Joe reached up, grabbed the wrist, and started pelting back in the same direction, back down to the west, back down to South Shore. And as he dragged this man, this spirit along with him, the man turned to a teen, and the teen turned to a boy, and Joe had to scoop this boy up in his arms as he did knees to chest, all the way down to Church Bay. And when he finally arrived, heaving in his chest, child was a child once again, wrapped in rough sailcloth. He placed the baby down exactly where he found it, shaking from top to toe. The arms reached up once more, but now Joe, having had a whole night, stepped back, turned around, and walked away, never looking back. Joe would reach home that high noon, his wife bursting into tears, so happy to see him, she never even asked what had happened that night. And he told no one, not for many years. And when he finally did, he wasn't even sure if it really happened, or if the devil himself had shown him what would happen should he continue and not change his ways. On some nights, near Church Bay, when the wind is just right, you can still hear the plaintive cry of a little voice in the night. But if you ever go looking, be careful, because what you once may pick up, you may not be ever to put down again. The end.
Raven's Roost by Ellen Hollis. They say that Henry Ravens took a small but loyal crew with him when he left the island. They say that he was an experienced sailor, and that this voyage would be no different from others he had sailed in the past. They say that, given the distance, as we now know it, he should have found land within the month. They say a lot of things, but what they say is not always what was. Yes, the ship was well built, the crew faithful, provisions stowed, the land weighted beyond the waves, yet they never reached it. After a terrible storm scattered the rest of the fleet, we arrived at a strange, wild place, part curse, part sanctuary. Waves hammered the rocks. Wind screamed, and still we survived. Shelters were built, plans made, survival insisted upon. But 1 month later, Henry Ravens himself sailed away, leaving us behind to wait, to question, to wonder. No help returned. No rescue came. We rescued ourselves eventually. 2 ships finally left for the promised home, yet Ravens was never seen again. Some say he and his crew died at sea, drifting forever, searching for land beyond the horizon. Others say they reached new shores and were killed for trespass. And still others whisper there is a mysterious island where Ravens and his men live on as free men, away from crown or commonwealth, living in bounty and peace. They say most birds find a home where they can roost, surviving storms and driven off course with an instinct for survival. Mayhaps Ravens found his own roost where he could thrive. I'd rather dream of an island of peace and bounty than imagine an eternal sailor always seeking the lights beyond the horizon, scanning the sea for a hint of land, always hoping for a glimpse of civilization, always yearning for deliverance, searching for ship's rest. Don't you?
I was sitting on the old stone steps, carved into the cliffside, tossing rocks into the sea, and thinking foul thoughts about my wife, when I saw the jewelry box floating on the waves. It was beautiful. One of those old classics of cedarwood encrusted with tiny mirrors, the very kind they simply don't make anymore. The box was only a few feet away. I took a hold of a cactus root and leaned out over the water. After a couple of attempts, I managed to get my hand on the box. Feeling as proud as a schoolboy, I began to lift it towards me. Immediately, fat, red tentacles oozed out of the ocean and seized my arm. They were incredibly strong. Had I not gotten a secure grip on the cactus root, I would have been finished. The tentacles exerted a steady pull. Soon I felt my arm begin to tire. The muscles in my fingers began to strain and snap. Panic fluttered in my chest and began to shift into outright despair. Then, abruptly, I was free. I fell back onto the steps, gasping for relief. The animal probably could have taken me with but a few more moments of effort, but evidently it could not be bothered. For an instant I saw a fleshy head, bigger than a dog, and golden, coolly indifferent eyes staring up at me from the waves. An octopus. A real giant, too. I had never even heard of one that size before. I crawled back up the stairs, but curious, stayed there. I wanted to try and understand just what the beast's game was. After a little while, pop! Up came the jewelry box again. Looking closely, I could just make out the tentacle stretching from beneath the box several feet into a cave just under the rocks. The octopus, using its famous talent for camouflage, simply shifted the color and texture of its tentacles so that the appendage from the vantage point of the stairs was all but invisible. It was then noon, and the mirrors on the jewelry box caught the light. It dazzled, seemed to dance amidst a kaleidoscope of reflections. A seagull, attracted by the light and perhaps thinking the box was a dead fish, landed on it with a triumphant squawk. Up came the tentacles, and the bird barely offered a moment's struggle before it was pulled under the waves into the cave to satisfy that implacable hunger. In less than 5 minutes, the box was back again. Ingenious monster. This all gave me an idea. On my cell phone, I called my wife and asked her to meet me at the yacht club patio. From the yacht club, it was only a short walk to the stone steps. She complained on the phone about the suddenness of the invitation, but begrudgingly agreed. I then took out my penknife and cut into the cactus root until it was barely attached to the earth. I tested it. Yes, enough to sustain a bit of weight, but not strong enough to resist the power in those pulling tentacles. Shortly thereafter, at the yacht club, my wife greeted me with an insult. You still don't know how to look presentable, dressing like a low caste. Christ! We ordered drinks and leaned back in each other's chairs to maximize the distance between us. Conversation between us spurted and fell into grim, familiar silence. I tossed away your ring, I told her matter-of-factly. The one your mother gave you. I put it in a jewelry box and tossed it into the ocean at the old stone steps. You selfish swine, she hissed. She would have said more, but she prioritized saving her ring over my humiliation. I'll deal with you later, she told me, and then ran for the steps. I sat in my chair and read the paper. I ordered another drink. There were people all around me. I started up a conversation with the old sea bum, Ralph Razan. We talked about the island sloops of the 40s for a good half hour. I made sure he would remember me. Once I finished speaking with Razan, I folded my paper and glanced at my watch in exaggerated concern. I called a waiter over and asked him if my wife had returned. When he said that she had not, I pantomimed a frown. Better call the police then, I mused, just in case she might have slipped. Or... The police arrived and followed me down the old stone steps. There was no sign of my wife, nor, I noted, privately, was there any sign of the cactus root. The jewelry box, however, was there, floating in the waves. We all commented on how strange it looked. One officer removed his baton and tried to nudge the box closer to land. In a flash, the sea erupted into a mass of seething, seeking tentacles. "God!" the police cried, and began shooting into the water. A jet of black ink billowed out from the cave, and quickly the lagoon was shrouded in impenetrable darkness. The police stared into the lagoon, dazed, but I thought to look out into the sea. I just managed to catch a glimpse of the retreating mass of sagging red skin and tentacles as big as tree roots. Tucked under those tentacles, in much the manner a man may tuck a loaf of bread under his arm, there was something pale, ragged, and stiff. A woman's body. I thought it looked like a broken doll. I was quite glad the clever beast had escaped. I was, after all, in its debt. Thank you.
There is a room. There is a room. Small, white, cold. It exists outside of comfort, outside of mercy. The kind of room where time doesn't pass, it waits. It waits in silence, in stillness, in the sterile breath of fluorescent light. The walls are too clean, too smooth, as if they've been scrubbed not just of dirt, but of memory. There are no windows, no clocks, and yet, time is here. It is always here. Tonight, it waits for a man named Thomas. He sits at a metal table bolted to the floor, dressed in prison gray. His hands tremble, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something that has been gnawing at him for years. His eyes are sunken, hollowed by sleepless nights and the weight of memory. He does not look up. He does not speak. He listens to the silence, to the ticking that isn't there but is somehow felt in the bones. Across from him sits a chaplain in black. His voice is soft, practiced, like a lullaby for the dying. He speaks of peace, of forgiveness, of salvation. But his words fall like dust in a crypt. They do not reach Thomas. They do not even reach the corners of the room because they are not alone. There is something else there, not seen, not heard, but felt. It lingers in the corners where the light doesn't quite reach. It moves in the flicker of the overhead bulb, in the way the shadows stretch just a little too far. It is the cold that seeps into the skin, the breath that fogs the air when no one exhales. It is the weight pressing down on the chest, the sense that someone is standing just behind you, watching, waiting. The chaplain doesn't feel it. Not yet. But Thomas does. He has felt it for years. It followed him into this place. It has never left. The clock ticks somewhere, unseen. It is nearly midnight. Thomas finally speaks. His voice is low, cracked, like dry leaves underfoot. He speaks of fear, of prayers unanswered, of a mother who died not by his hand, but by the slow erosion of hope. He speaks of guilt that clings like a second skin. The chaplain offers scripture. Thomas offers silence. And then something shifts. The air grows heavier. The light dims just slightly. The presence leans in. Thomas begins to speak of another woman, one he loved, one he lost. He doesn't say her name. He doesn't have to. Her absence is a wound that never closed, a scream that never stopped echoing. He tells the chaplain about the night it all went wrong, about the bar, about the second drink, about the moment he chose delay over reconciliation. He thought he had time. He thought he could fix it. But while he drank, death came. He doesn't describe the killer. He doesn't need to. The horror lies not in the face of the intruder, but in the silence that followed, in the unanswered screams, in the blood that soaked the floor, in the way her body was found, broken, lifeless, alone. Thomas lowers his head. I held her, he says. After, I held her and cried. The chaplain is stunned. You weren't the one who... No, Thomas says, but they never looked for anyone else. The room grows colder. The shadows deepen. The presence draws closer. I should have gone home, Thomas whispers. I should have said no to that second drink. The chaplain tries to offer comfort, but his words falter. There is something in the room now, something that does not forgive. Thomas speaks again, his voice barely audible. She was waiting for me. She wanted to talk. She wanted to fix things too, but I wasn't there. The lights flicker. The clock ticks louder. I think she called for me, he says. I think she screamed my name, but I didn't hear her. I was too far away, and by the time I got home... He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. The chaplain reaches out, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. You don't have to go alone. Thomas looks up, and for a moment, just a moment, his eyes widen. He sees something that the chaplain cannot, something standing just behind him, watching, waiting. It is not angry, it is not kind, it is simply there. I'm ready, Thomas says. Thomas stands, the chaplain follows, but as they move toward the door, the presence moves too. It follows them. It always has. As the door closes behind them, the only sound is the endless ticking of the clock. A minute past midnight. But the story does not end here. In the silence that follows, the room remains cold. The shadows remain long. The presence does not leave. It never does. It waits. Not for justice, not for peace, but for the next soul to cross the threshold. It feeds on regret. It drinks fear like wine. The light above the table flickers, once, twice, then dies. Darkness swallows the room, and in that darkness, something breathes. Not the breath of the living, no. This is older, hungrier. It moves without sound, without shape, but it is there, coiling through the air like smoke. It remembers every scream, every plea, every final heartbeat. It remembers Thomas. It remembers them all. And somewhere in the black, a voice, dry as dust, cold as the grave, whispers, "You were too late." Then, silence. But not peace. Never peace. Because the room is still waiting, and it always will.
A Bermuda cottage. How quaint. How perfectly not frightening. Now this is a charming old Bermuda cottage, built around 1720. It sits high on a hill and overlooks a very sleepy, slow Somerset. The ocean stretches out before it from horizon to horizon. And this is where the Lushers live. And this is their story. When they first moved in, nothing seemed strange. If anything, there was a feeling of warmth. Sorry. Nice things. A happy thing. A contented sort of place where peace filled almost every single room. But that all changed when the renovations began. At first, nothing really went on, nothing really happened. There was just some work being done, a little children's room at the back of the house. Now, Chris had hired a Jamaican national to help him with his renovations, a man named Fred, apparently. And Fred was sent into the back room to just check on the electricals in the soon-to-be children's study area. And Fred came running right back, said, "Hey, man, you got a lady sitting in the window?" "Chris, a lady? Well, my wife's already left for work." "A lady?" The man nodded. "Yeah. She wearing a robe, bar slippers on, shawl, smoking a cigarette. You know her?" No idea. So Chris goes to the back room, but there's nothing there. Fred just shook his head and said, "We Jamaicans are very ghost aware." Curious now, Chris reaches out to the former owners, the daughters and even granddaughters of the former occupant, a Mrs. King, a woman who once lived, loved, and died in that cottage. And he described what his friend had seen. They all gasped. "That's Nana," they cried. Wanting to see through this new adventure, one evening Chris had the entire King family come in to see if they could make contact. They stood upstairs and looked down through the opening joins in the small room below. The floorboards had not yet been laid. They called out, "Nana, if you're here, open and close the door." In amazement, the door below opened wide and shut. Once, twice, 3 times. Then they shouted out with excitement, "Now open the door wide and slam it shut." So it did. Wow! And Chris, needing to see more, ran downstairs, went to the door, and it was bolted shut from the inside. A few nights later, Chris was tiling the downstairs room with his friend Michael Hooper. You could still see through the joins now below the room going up Mike taps him on the shoulder. There's somebody watching us. Chris looks up, but there's nothing to be seen, not even a shadow on the wall, and he says, "Don't worry about that. It's probably Miss King." Then half joking, he called out, "Miss King, I need some light. Flick on the upstairs." And it came on. Chris, with a smile on his face, went about his little business and, "Thanks, Miss King, turn it off." And it was. The next sound he heard was the door slamming shut as Michael had run out of the house. He didn't wait. Later on, Chris is back in his renovations and he's painting the ceiling between the fans. At the time, his hand moves and it touches a live water. And up his arm goes the jolt. Reeling from shock and pain, Chris leans back and nearly falls off the ladder, but feels a small hand in his back. Recovering his balance and grabbing on, he simply sighs in relief and says, "Thanks, Miss King." Karen, Chris's wife, has one story to add. Now, she says the house must have a presence, for their silverware keeps going missing. "We're down to 3 forks and 2 spoons, she laughs. "There used to be an entire set. I used to blame Chris and the kids, but it keeps happening with only the forks and spoons. I still have all the knives." The story goes that Mrs. King was expecting her whole family to come back one Sunday for a brunch. Fish chowder, traditional breakfast. And that was the day she died. And so maybe she's still setting the table. If that's true, then that cottage on the hill isn't haunted at all. It's just a home, waiting for everyone to come back and fill it with Sunday's warmth. The end.
Some Bermuda place names sing of beauty, fairylands, Horseshoe Bay, but others whisper of darkness. One such name is Skeeter's Corner in Somerset, near Daniel's Head, a place tied to a murder that still haunts Bermuda's memory. October 1878. Anna Skeeters looked crisp and lovely that Sunday at St. James Church. A white dress, a green-lined parasol, a smile masking pain. Everyone in Somerset knew Anna, a kind, hard-working woman married to Edward James Skeeters, a restless man known for charm, temper, and too many other women. That afternoon, as Anna stood in the churchyard, one of those women, Anne Morris, mocked her aloud. "Where's your husband tonight?" she teased. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Anna turned away humiliated and walked home toward the small cottage she shared with Edward on the shore near Daniel's Head. It was the last time anyone had seen her alive. By Monday, Edward Skeeters was knocking on doors, asking after his wife. He said he'd come home late to find her gone, that she'd taken some clothes and his savings, that perhaps she'd sailed off to start a new life. He even posted a notice in the Royal Gazette offering a reward for news. But the neighbors didn't buy it. They'd heard the shouting on Sunday night. They'd seen the bruises. They remembered how Anna once went to magistrate for help after he'd blackened her eye, and how the magistrate had told her it was a private matter. Now, Anna was gone. Days passed. The parishes murmured. A mob of women stormed the cottage searching for clues. Constables found clothes rinsed but still stained dark. there was no proof. Until the sea gave up its secret. A week later, fishermen noticed something unusual in the depths of the channel. Waves breaking all around, except for one silent spot. When the storm eased, they rowed out with grappling lines and dragged the reef. What they pulled up chilled the island. A body, headless, anchored with rope and an 80-pound stone. The remains were brought ashore to the very cottage she'd shared with her husband. Later, divers from HMS Terror recovered Anna's petticoat and a long twist of gray-sprinkled hair still bound in the knot she wore to church that Sunday. Edward Skeeters was arrested. The women of Somerset gathered outside the jail shouting for justice. He was moved to Hamilton Jail for his own protection. The trial began the following spring. The jury, all white men, as was the custom, took 25 minutes to convict him. The judge donned a black cap and sentenced Edward Skeeters to hang. He went calmly to the gallows in July 1879, even reciting a poem that ended, "Tell my mother, her prayer is granted. God has pardoned her darling boy." Before his death, he confessed everything. Anna had confronted him about his mistress. Enraged, he'd thrown an oil lamp that burned her face. When she threatened to report him, he choked her twice, then rowed her body out and sank her in the bay, believing the sea would keep his secret until Judgment Day. Justice had its irony. The same stone he used to sink Anna was later set at his grave on Burt's Island. And when storms lash the harbor, even now, some say you can see him dancing on the rocks, a wraith condemned to pace the place where he hid his sin. The Skeeter cottage burned down that very night. The rope that hung him was kept for years as a relic, a grim reminder. The story of Skeeter's Corner endures because it isn't only a murder story. It's a story about power, about women silenced and men taught they could do as they pleased. The past, it seems, still speaks if you listen to the wind at Daniel's head. The end.
Down a quiet lane in Somerset, there stands a house that's older than most trees around it, Rose Hill Farmhouse. If you look at Richard Norwood's 1620 map, you'll find it listed as Chamberlain House. That's how far back it goes. 4 centuries of wind, rain, and whispered stories. At first glance, it looks sturdy, peaceful, just a sleepy old home. But lean in closer, and the stone tells a different story. Weathered corners, sagging beams, a kind of memory in the walls, waiting for the right night to speak. For generations, it was both a home and a workshop. The Patterson family once lived here making those curious old bottles, the clear, round-bottomed ones sealed with a glass marble inside. You can still find them washing up on Bermuda shores. Later, the house belonged to a man named Chris Adams. He lived there with his family, and for the most part, life was ordinary, until the hallway outside his son's room decided otherwise. One night, Chris crept down the passage to make sure lights out really meant lights out. He lifted his hand to knock when something slammed the air beside his ear. Bang, bang, bang! He froze, heart hammering. Then came another sound, the clatter and spin of glass marbles rolling across the floor. A whole storm of them, rattling, bouncing, colliding, as if 1,000 invisible hands had spilled a jar at once. Chris flinched, ducked, but nothing touched him. The sounds whirled around him, echoing off the walls, then stopped. Just stopped. He stood there, hands still raised, the silence so heavy it pressed against his chest. It only happened once. The marbles never returned, but something else stayed behind. Every winter, when the weather turns wild, when the wind twists through the hedges and the rain hammers the roof, another sound comes alive. Heavy boots. Footsteps that start upstairs and thunder through the hallways. Bang, crash, slam. Doors fly open, slam shut. Floorboards shake. The whole house seems to hold its breath. Then just as suddenly, silence. Chris says it always happens when the barometer dips low, as if the storm itself wakes the past. Maybe it's the Patterson clan, still clomping about their workshop, rolling bottles, sealing glass marbles in their endless task. Maybe it's just the house remembering. Or maybe some old energy still runs its nightly rounds, unwilling to rest, its boots echoing down the corridor of time. So, if you ever find yourself near Rose Hill Farmhouse, down a quiet lane in Somerset, and the wind begins to howl, listen closely. You might hear it too. Bang, crash. Then the sound of marbles rolling just out of sight. The end.
Who is the woman seen at the windows of Landmark? A misty face, a drifting figure that moves through rooms of the old main house, quiet, pale, waiting. Caretakers have seen her, residents too. She lingers where the light fades first. When I was asked to write about the history of Landmark, I found more than architecture and family names. I found her. Landmark stands high above Whale Bay in Southampton. Built in 1933 by Bermudian architect Nat Hutchings with New York designer Bill Ballard, it was meant to be Ballard's Bermuda retreat. Grand terraces, sweeping sea views, the kind of place meant for laughter, cocktails, and famous guests. In 1948, it was bought by Dwight Deere Wyman, heir to the John Deere fortune, a Broadway producer, a man who bought glitz wherever he went. When he died, the house passed to his daughter, Anna Deere Wyman. Anna had been a dancer on Broadway, radiant and quick on her feet. But one day, on this very property, she had a bicycle accident that shattered more than her bones. It ended her career. After that, the stage lights dimmed. She turned to her father's business, producing plays instead of performing them. And she drank. When the end came, it came fast and strange. March 22nd. Anna was staying at Landmark with a few friends, the Browns, and a Mrs. Holmes with her children. Her doctor, Henry Holmes, was due to arrive that afternoon. The morning was ordinary. Iced tea, breakfast at 11. Then, noise. Breaking glass. Mrs. Burroughs, the housekeeper, heard Mrs. Brown cry out from the games room. Moments later, Mr. Brown appeared, holding a blue beach towel soaked in blood. He said Anna had fallen down the stairs. They found her at the bottom of a flight of steps, bleeding from the head, conscious, muttering she wanted to go to bed. They helped her to a guest room, pressed towels to the wound. Dr. Holmes arrived just after 3:30. He examined her, thought it was only a cut. Nothing serious, he said. But by 8 that night, she was in convulsions. She was rushed to the hospital. Near midnight, she was gone. The verdict? Death by misadventure. No one spoke of the Browns again. No further inquiry. Just a quiet burial and whispers that something about the night just didn't fit. Years passed. The house changed hands, the grounds divided into condominiums, but the story didn't fade. Caretakers began seeing her, a woman in white, drifting down hallways, pausing at staircases, sometimes at the games room door. Others saw her face at the upstairs window, pale, uncertain, as if asking, why? Is it Anna Wyman, still pacing the home she never meant to leave? No one knows. But often, when a life is cut short by confusion and pain, something of it lingers. Some say it's guilt. Some say longing. Perhaps it's simply unfinished business, a soul rehearsing the moment it can never rewrite. So if you ever walk near Landmark at night, and if you feel a chill drift down from the hill, look up. You might see her, the dancer who fell, still searching for her cue to take a final bow.
Mina was brought as a bondswoman all the way from the Caribbean islands to Bermuda, torn from her home and worse, separated from her children, who were enslaved on a nearby plantation. This loss filled her with hatred for her owners, especially her mistress, who flaunted an expensive ring she had purchased from the sale of Mina's own children. That ring, Mina knew it was priceless, and she was determined to get her hands on it. If she could find a way to sell it, she might buy her freedom and maybe, just maybe, find and free her children too. Getting hold of that ring became her obsession. One day, the mistress hosted one of her grand dinner parties, lavish affairs that drew the island's elite. She was famous for them. And for the dishes prepared by enslaved cooks whose skill outshone every fine chef in Bermuda. That night, the tables overflowed. Turtle stew, cassava pie, roasted fowl, and her favorite, rockfish, simmered slowly in thyme and onions. Laughter filled the house. Compliments came from every direction. The mistress was radiant, glowing in pride, until she ate a piece of fish without noticing the bone. It caught in her throat. She gasped, choked, and after a few desperate moments, fell still. By morning, she was pronounced dead. Burials in those days took place the very next day. The heat would not allow delay. As the family wept and neighbors mourned, Mina saw her chance. That night, when all were asleep, she crept into the graveyard. Moonlight fell across the fresh earth as she pried open the coffin. There lay the mistress, plump, powdered, and still wearing that ring. Mina tugged. The ring would not budge. She twisted, pulled again, and when that failed, her anger took hold. She struck the corpse once, twice, pummeling the body in frustration. And then, a sound, a loud, wet burp. The fishbone flew past Mina's shoulder. The corpse drew in a sharp breath and sat bolt upright. The dead mistress was alive. Mina screamed and fled, her feet pounding down the path toward the slave quarters, the mistress in wild pursuit. Mina knew what would come next. Grave robbery meant certain death. And the bitterest part? She had only wanted that ring to buy her freedom and find her children. But fate turned once more that night. The mistress's return from the dead became cause for celebration across the plantation. Everyone rejoiced. No one could bring themselves to punish Mina. Instead, the mistress did something unthinkable. She gave Mina her freedom. Mina returned to the Caribbean and was reunited with her children. She lived for many years, long enough to see her revenge become her reward. And they say that sometimes justice has a strange way of finding its own path. The end.